Hello and welcome to another edition of Grandstanders Live. I'm your host, Scott Kerman, and I'm joined by my usual cohort, Uncle Joe McLaughlin. Well, we have a special guest sitting in the grandstand. Now, back in the day, people, the Boston Globe, it wasn't even arguably, was the best sports page in the country. And back in the day, people, the best sports magazine was Sports Illustrated. And it's not a coincidence that our guest tonight, this sports writer of over 50 years, was the senior sports writer for not only the Globe, but Sports Illustrated. He's come out with his newest book, Tall Men, Short Shorts, the 1969 NBA Finals, Wilt, Russell, Lakers, Celtics, and a very young sports reporter. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome to our show, Lee Montville.
Hello. Very good. It's like a sitting ovation. I like that.
Absolutely.
That's the Zoom.
Yep. Lee, you've come from one room to another to join us. That's how it worked out.
Okay.
All right, Lee. When were you sitting there and it came up with the idea, I'm going to do a book about the 1969 finals? How does that come about in Lee Montville's mind?
I don't know. I've told stories about doing that. I was 25 years old. Oh, we have a new guy coming in.
Yeah.
Hey Lee, how you doing? Sorry about
Hi.
that.
I was 25 years old. I had just come to the Boston Globe, and through a bunch of circumstances, I wound up covering the playoffs in 1969. And I had never been to California. I'd never seen the Pacific Ocean. I'd never seen a palm tree. I'd never been on a plane long enough where they had an in-flight movie, you know. So I was a total neophyte doing the whole thing. And the book is myself as a 77-year-old guy looking at the 25-year-old guy and kind of being judgmental about the things he was doing and the things he thought at the time. You know, I mean, you're 25, you have a mixture of overconfidence and a deep gnawing fear about everything, you know, and it's been kind of fun to go back and look at my old self there. But part of the motivation was my grandson, who was 14 years old, a kid named Jackson Miller, and he was playing the video game NBA 2K19, and you can pick your own team. And he said to me, "This guy, Wilt Chamberlain, was he any good?" I said, "Well, yeah, he was pretty good." So that's part of it too. You know, you reach a point where your personal history, people start to ask you, did George Washington really wear those wooden teeth? You know,
Right.
so you kind of say, well, maybe I should mention it all.
Yeah, so when I think of 1969, you know, I was 3 years old at the time, so obviously it didn't make much of an impact. I think of Bill Russell's last year as player coach. That seemed to make the most impact on me, that historical fact, but also Sam Jones, who was one of my father's favorite players, always said, don't forget Sam Jones. That was also his last season. So this was a huge kind of transition for the Celtics.
Oh, it was traumatic for me because I was like 16 years old, and it was like my first intimations of mortality that you know,
Kind of like,
Russell would be gone, and everything would be over, and there would no longer be a championship every year, you know, under the Christmas tree.
kind of how I saw when Bob Rio left, Joe.
It was something else. It was, but
So Leah, this was a huge moment for the Celtics. You come in as a 25-year-old sports writer, been working for the Globe for 15 months, and you couldn't imagine what was going to happen. The transition of power was happening.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of assigned me to it. There were a couple of reasons. There was a guy named Herb Ralby who had covered the Celtics for a bunch of years, but he had a second job, and he was the PR man for the Boston Bruins. So he'd been able to cover the playoffs through all those years.
Yeah.
But now the Bruins had this young guy, this Bobby Orr guy, and they were suddenly in the playoffs, and they were playing Toronto and then Montreal. So he was indisposed. He had to handle all the playoff arrangements. so that's when they brought me in off the bench. And it kind of promised to be a short stay doing this. That they had finished fourth, the Celtics, during the regular season in the East. And lo and behold, they went and they beat Philadelphia, the Sixers, and then they beat the Knicks. And all of a sudden, I'm flying back and forth to California. And it was an interesting situation because I'm 25 and all the other sports writers, the three other sports writers that were covering it, they were all 35, the same age as Russell, and they had kids and all of that. And I was just this young guy trying to figure it all out.
So, Red Auerbach finishes up as a coach. What was your relationship over the years with Red Auerbach?
Red Auerbach was very good. He was all done when I came in.
But he was obviously the general manager.
He was the general manager, and I think he was just a basic level genius. He ran the Celtics like it was a neighborhood store or something. There were no heirs, there was no public relations, there was nothing. He just handled people as people. The Celtics at that time, their front office was 4 people. Red Auerbach, his secretary, Mary Whalen, the PR guy, Howie McHugh, and Jeff Cohen, who was like 25 years old, who was like my age, who they gave him the title assistant general manager, but he went out for coffee and donuts and stuff every day. You know?
Lisa, are you telling me that Red did all of the contracts, everything back then?
He did everything. If you wanted to get a season ticket to the Celtics, and they didn't have that many season ticket holders back then, but if you wanted to get a season ticket, you showed up at the office and Red took you upstairs to the garden and he sat you at different seats and he said, this will be $5 a game and this will be $10 a game and the whole deal.
I was 8 years old that year, and the woman across the street.
And he gave you a travel bag and signed it too.
Yeah. Ariel Bryan. The woman across from me had season tickets. She brought me into like 5 or 6 games a year. She had center court seats, about 20 rows up. I mean, the pick of you could sit anywhere you wanted in the garden in those days at a Celtics game.
The NBA itself had 6 people working for it. True fact.
Really, 6 people.
Big headquarters.
Wow. Hey, Lee, I got a question for you. I'm Tim Hoey, by the way. I just joined in here. I'm a huge fan of yours. I told Scotty we had to have you on the show. You've been around a long time. Who was the favorite athlete that you met through all of the years that you covered sports?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Or maybe like a short list of 3, maybe.
That's always a tough thing when they say, who's your favorite, or what was the funniest thing you ever saw, or what was it? I don't want to put you on
the spot.
Bill Lee was a lot of fun to be around. Bill Lee was a lot of fun to be around. Kevin McHale was fun to be around. ML Carr was fun to be around.
What athlete did you get most excited to be going to a game to watch? I know, or 3, what star player, maybe it wasn't even a star player, did you appreciate for whatever level, for whatever reason?
I don't know. I covered a whole lot of Marvin Hagler's fights.
Oh yeah.
He was kind of cool to be around, and he took us to a bunch of different places. He took us to Las Vegas and to London and
on his dime.
No.
You're following the fights. Yeah.
That's
a real nice guy.
They used to send people everywhere then.
Yeah. God rest his soul. I know that was very sad that he passed away recently.
Scott, you go back to your questions about the book. Now I got to get that out of Lee.
Yeah. Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, Lee, you could probably not have 2 more different personalities. Tell us about those personalities.
Well, Chamberlain was the great physical wonder of the world. I think the truest statement in the whole book is at the end of the book when I say that in all the years since Wilt Chamberlain played, no player has been compared to Wilt Chamberlain. Nobody has said, well, here's the next Wilt Chamberlain.
Yeah.
A little bit Shaquille O'Neal maybe, but but he wasn't close to Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain had the greatest body and coordination of anybody who's ever come along, I think.
You know, one of the only close ones might be the Greek kid now for Milwaukee. I mean, he's a little bit similar in coordination and size, you know.
Yeah, but
no, but the athleticism that Wilt had. I mean, I don't think Kareem has the athleticism that Wilt had.
Yeah, but Russell had the great mind. I think Russell was a very cerebral guy and figured things out. And if you had put Russell's mind together with Wilt's body, you would have created some marvel of humanity. But Wilt just, he didn't like to practice. He didn't, and when he did practice, he fooled around. I mean, he was impossible to coach. Whereas Russell put everything together. I mean, he looked at all the different pieces and he figured out the angles to everything. Wilt seemed to operate, if he had like the cartoon light bulb over his head, and the light bulb would say sometime, you should score tonight. And he'd go out and he'd score 100 points. And then the light bulb another night would say, you should get rebounds tonight. And he'd go out and get 55 rebounds. And then he had one whole year where he decided he wanted to get assists. He led the entire NBA in assists. So, but you never knew what the light bulb was going to do with Wilt. And he let teams down all the time when it got big at the end. And Russell on the other side of the coin kind of sucked things up at the end and was at his best in these big moments. And certainly the record showed that.
How big was it at the time for Auerbach to name Bill Russell the head coach?
In retrospect, it's sort of a civil rights kind of thing. He was the first African-American coach in the NBA, pretty much the first African-American coach in modern professional sports in America. But I think at the time, Red, in his, running the ship like it was the corner store, he said, "What's the best way for Bill Russell for me to get Bill Russell to play another year? Who would be the best coach for Bill Russell?" And he said, "Well, Bill Russell could get Bill Russell to play," and that was his reason more than any altruistic reason, I think, and it turned out to be a good one.
Well, I would like to be the natural progression, from Red to Bill to the acolyte.
Well, the amazing thing was that Russell was the head coach and the star player and had no assistants. There was no assistant coach.
No assistant.
You're right.
Nothing. They had, you look at Brad Stevens and he had like 15 guys in the little zipper pull-up.
There's almost an assistant for every player. At a halftime, there's a crowd of men in suits around him.
Yeah, coach for what you're going to have for lunch.
Lee, I got another question. The sports writers back then, the way that we all got our information about the games back then was through the sports writers. I mean, I used to read that Sunday Globe sports section from cover to cover. Do you think the writers today have the same influence that you guys had back then? I mean, there weren't many vehicles for us to get information back. I'd wait for Sports Illustrated on Thursday, open it in the mail and, rip into it. That was our window into the sports life with what you guys wrote. Now there's 5 channels you can turn to and channels dedicated to individual sports and things like that. Do you see a gigantic change in the role the sports writer has now?
Yeah, it's all become more visual. It's become, while you couldn't wait to get to the paper, now you check your phone before you go to bed. You check your phone when you wake up. The whole construction of stories, I think, is a lot different now. There isn't a premium on style or anything. It's just getting it in. Back then, the NBA Finals, only 2 of the 7 games were on television in Boston, and only 3 of the 7 were on television in Los Angeles. So you either got your information from listening to Johnny Most or from reading the stories of the 25-year-old guy who was out in Los Angeles with the Celtics.
Now, did the players have to treat you with a different type of respect because of the power that you guys had?
No,
You got to make or break an athlete in the town.
it was a far more human thing. I mean, there weren't a lot of people at practice. I mean, a lot of reporters. There were no radio guys. There were no television guys, and there were only like 3 or 4 sports writers. And sometimes I would go to practice. I'd be the only one, you know. And I kind of didn't like that. I wanted someone else that Bill Russell looked at with more respect than myself asking questions. You know, he was a tough guy, and I was new to the whole show. You know, he'd won 10 NBA championships while I was going through junior high, high school, and in college.
Did he treat you like that? Did he treat you like that, or did he treat you?
Yeah, he didn't have a lot of time for me. You know, he was a tough guy to a lot of people. There'd be like a day. I mean, they practiced over at the Tobin Gym a lot in Roxbury, and they practiced, you know, at weird places. And there'd be a time where it would be just me and him in the locker room. And if he didn't have something to do, maybe we'd talk for 15 or 20 minutes. And I'd go home and I'd say, well, Bill and I, we're together now, you know? And then the next day I'd say, hello.
Was there any rookies there that you got along especially well on that team? I can't believe.
Yeah, I mean, the next day I'd say, hey, Bill, and he'd walk right by me.
Well, I always appreciate Lee Montville for your humor. To be honest, because a guy who I was a stand-up comedian for over 15 years. To me, when I think of your writing, I think of humor, and I think that's where, to be honest with you, there weren't many sports humorists, and I thought that also you played, you know, obviously a very talented writer, but you played that role for me personally. What do you feel like as far as sports humor now, or humor in general? You feel like the political correctness of the world now has kind of neutered all humor? Because I'm sure if we look back in your pieces, you took a lot of chances, because that humor is dangerous.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just always thought that we're going and watching these games for fun, really.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's the bottom line. We're just trying to have a little fun and get excited.
That's a voice I heard in my head of your writing. That's what I heard.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think everything has become more serious with the bigger the money and all of that. I don't know. There doesn't seem to be much humor in sports. There doesn't seem to be much humor in anything.
Do you hesitate when you write now, writing a humorous line? Do you hesitate to say, is this politically correct?
No, I mean, you know, I'm not writing every day.
Right. But when you do, is that in your head at all?
Not so much, no. You know, but I think like press boxes are different now. Press boxes are real quiet. They're like an insurance agency or a bank or something. There's nobody making jokes and carrying on and because if you make a joke, what you do, I guess, is you just put it on Twitter. You know, you just type out your joke and you don't want to share it with these other guys who might copy it and put. I don't know what it is, but way back then, you know, we used to joke a lot about, you know, pitchers for the Red Sox and stuff like that.
John Havlicek, we appreciated him growing up, but I feel like as the years go on, that he's become a very underrated player in the NBA circles of best players in the history of the NBA. Where do you think John Havlicek fits? Because when you look at his numbers, Lee, they're off the charts.
Yeah, no, he was terrific. I mean, he was a terrific player, a terrific guy. He was just great to watch. And I mean, the irony is that we all thought that he was going to be the indestructible person, didn't we? You know, and now he's the one that passed kind of first of all of them. And but he was a great player. He just ran everyone to death. You know, I remember
those giant lungs of his.
Yeah, I remember seeing him at I guess it was Ryder Cup in Brookline. He was there watching, and I was there with this guy Warren Delaney, who was about 6'8" and had played freshman basketball at Notre Dame. And Warren always would play basketball and terrorize the guys that I knew. And so I went over to Havlicek and I said, what would you do here with Warren? And he said, I would run him to death. You know, I would just run him, and his tongue would be sticking out. And Warren, of course, said, I'd give him a little muscle, you know, and I'd slow him down. And, you know, he couldn't catch him.
Lee, are there any particular moments in your career that you were present at that really stick out in your mind as like, oh my God, I'm so happy I was here to see this?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, like a whole bunch, sure. You know, I mean, the Miracle on Ice, and
You were there.
yeah. You know, the ball going through Buckner's legs,
Oof.
Marvin Hagler winning those fights. You know, I saw Muhammad Ali fight sometimes.
Did you ever get to interview Ali?
Huh?
Did you ever get to interview Ali?
Yeah, I had yeah. I mean, kind of. I had a strange thing happen. The Globe sent me out to Cleveland when he fought Chuck Wepner.
Yeah.
And the fight was at the Richfield Coliseum, which was outside of Cleveland, maybe about, I don't know, 35-minute ride. And I rented a car because I had never covered a fight before. And so I had the rental car, and I didn't know there was like a press bus that went from the hotel to the arena. And this was for the weigh-in the day before the fight. So I went out and they had the weigh-in and they said all the stuff and everything. And everybody else got back on the press bus. And I said, well, let me hang around and I'll go to Ali's locker room and see if maybe I could get something different. So I went in there and Ali was lying on a training table, but his head was kind of propped up against the wall. And Red Fox was in there, and Red Fox was telling these dirty jokes.
Oh, yeah.
And James Brown, the singer, was there, and
Oh
Billy Eckstein, the singer, was there. And I'm this little white guy with red hair and freckles, kind of just, I just put myself way over in the corner and just stayed there. And Red Fox would tell these wonderful dirty jokes, and everybody had tears running down their face. And Ali would say, tell another one. And he must have told 5 or 6 just totally disgusting jokes. And I just wanted that moment to stay forever. I mean, it was a great moment.
That's the only jokes that Red Fox knew. I've seen it.
I don't know. We used to have the party record when I was a kid. That was great, you know.
Oh my! That's where you wish you had an iPhone. You could have taken a picture there.
Yeah. But you know, I look at it. Muhammad Ali is dead. Red Fox is dead. James Brown is dead. Billy Eckstein is dead. How can I verify that all this happened? You know,
That's the best story.
He was around, but he's dead too. So
yeah. Just keep on adding guys that passed away.
That's right.
We still got you, Lee. We still got you.
Oh yeah, he was there too. Wow, that's crazy. All keeps happening. Tell me about Jerry West. You know, obviously, Jerry West, not only a remarkable player, but he seemed to be the poster child for bitterness in the decade of the 60s, how he showed at the worst in his face that how could the Celtics keep on beating us?
Yeah, I mean, he kind of didn't hide anything. He was this tragic figure, and certainly a tragic figure in this series. He'd already lost 5 times in the finals to the Celtics. This was the 6th time, and he just opened up his wrist every time after a loss.
Sure did, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was just miserable. And, you know, there was that whole thing that he never, outside of when he coached the Lakers, he never came back to the Garden because he just hated the whole thing of coming in there, and it had too many bad memories. And you know, he was the MVP of this series, the only player on a losing team ever to be the MVP. And he had a great series. He had 53 points in the first game, but in the 5th game, where the Lakers were winning in LA to go up 3-2. He pulled a hamstring late in the game. You know, he probably shouldn't even been in the game. And that slowed him down in game 6. And then in game 7, you know, a whole bunch of things happened and the Celtics won the whole thing and broke his heart again.
So Jack Kent Cook, when I started my business in Washington, D.C., I started a concierge service in the 80s, and Jack Kent Cook was one of my clients. And when I told him he was from Boston, he said, F Boston. That was the first thing he ever said to me. So he was still bitter in the 80s about what had happened in the 60s. Your interaction with the owner that put the balloons up on the rafters thinking they were going to celebrate.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had really no interaction with him, but like going to the Forum was like a look at the basketball future. You know, the Forum was like, I don't know, like 10 months old, and it had the pretty people and the whole thing. And then you'd come back to the Garden, which was a look at basketball's past, you know, and like there was, the NBA was at kind of a changing point. In the past, it had been kind of a carnival thing, you know, playing in Syracuse and Rochester and Fort Wayne. And now it was coming into the future. The new Madison Square Garden had opened, the Spectrum in Philadelphia and the Forum in LA. And so it was kind of transitional time. And Jack Kent Cook was sort of a look at what the owner of the future might be, you know, some kind of braggadocio guy who kind of,
you know, we used to look at the Lakers games and discuss, you know, with the dancing girls and the you know, there wasn't a moment where they weren't blasting music and trying to, you know, fill your brain with entertainment. Now every team is like that now. There isn't, even the Red Sox have turned into that now. There isn't. Me and Scott were at the game Monday night, and the second that there's a break in the action, they're blasting the Jumbotron or something at you. You know, they can't let you think for a second anymore.
yeah, well, if you're thinking, you're not buying, you know, you got to keep buying.
Elgin Baylor, I too young to appreciate him. Tell me about Elgin Baylor as a player. How would you compare, you know, obviously, give me a comparison as a modern day player to Elgin Baylor, because I've heard so much, but I've not talked to many people who've actually.
Elgin Baylor was the prototype of the modern day player when he first came along. They would always talk how he would jump in the air and guys would jump with him, and the other guys would come down and Elgin Baylor would still be in the air and he'd make
Right.
the basket. And he was a real post up guy, you know, he would go to post up guys and you would have a big problem with him because he was a one-on-one whirling dervish. And he was the future of basketball, actually. But by this series, he'd had some bad knee problems and he wasn't as big a factor as you would think. He had one really good game and that was about it. So
How did the Celtics win that series then? Obviously not the better team.
They lost the first 2 games. They came back. They won the third game. The fourth game came down to 7 seconds left. They were down a point, and they ran a play that Havlicek and Larry Siegfried had run at Ohio State, and they didn't even have a name for it. But it was a triple pick to set up Sam Jones for a jumper. And they set up the triple pick. Sam Jones came around. John Havlicek threw the ball to Sam Jones, and Sam Jones slipped. And as he slipped, he threw the ball up off the wrong foot, and the ball hit the rim, went high in the air, and came down through the hoop. And so they won by a point. So that was the game. That was the pivotal game in a way, because now it became a 2 out of 3 series. And then in game 5, the Lakers win the game, but Jerry West pulls his hamstring. Game 6, they come back to the Garden. The Celtics win again, and then game 7, all kinds of strange things happen with the balloons and the sailing, and Wilt gets hurt and takes himself out, and then Mitch Radikoff won't put him back in, and the Celtics win the whole thing.
And Don
I just gave away the whole book there for nothing.
Well, the book is fantastic. Tall Men, Short Shorts. It's a pleasure to have Lee Montville on this show. Thank you very much, and good luck with the book.
Thank you, fellas. Enjoy
Lee,
yourself.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's just an honor to chat with you.
Well,
Yeah,
that's our
great.
show for tonight. Remember to tune in next Wednesday night at 6:30 for another edition of Grandstanders Live. Please check us out on the grandstanders.com website. My name is Scott Kerman. Have a great and happy night.